The Buffalo Bills could pass the ball more in 2025, but I have my doubts. I'll explain that and more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our conversation. We have some great stuff to get into today, including a question on what the Bills would do if they didn't have James Cook this year, comparing Kaiir Elam to Maxwell Hairston. What was the most successful year of Josh Allen to this point? Is there a guy that was on the practice squad last year that could be on the active roster this year? But we start with a question about if the Bills could throw the ball more in 2025. And I want to start here because this came from our target distribution podcast last week. And that has sparked some really good conversation and a lot of good questions that have gotten back to me. And I'm excited to share some additional thoughts right now. And I would say a lot of the questions, a lot of the commentary and feedback that I've received has been about, where can the Bills find more passing attempts? Could they throw it more this year? And I think this question from Derek frames it really well. And Derek says this: if we actually have a defense that does its job and can get the people off the field and put the ball back in Josh Allen's hands at least one or two more times per game over the stretch of 17 games, do you think that could lead to a potential bump in gross targets and thus target shares? Perhaps I'm dreaming, or perhaps that's only in a perfect world if everything goes correctly. Just a hopeful fan over here. So like I said, a lot of feedback, and a lot of it was rooted in, well, how can the Bills get more passing attempts? And, will the defense be better this year and you have more possessions or whatever? There's been a lot of variables that people brought up, but this is kind of the foundation of where I got my information from. And it's that as a team last year, the Bills were 26th in total passing attempts, 28th in percentage of plays that were passes, 5th in percentage of plays that were runs. And I came to this conclusion that, hey, the Bills are just not a high volume passing offense, and expecting there to be a lot of targets to go around is probably not very safe. Now, I also acknowledge that last year, Josh Allen had 483 passing attempts, which was by far the lowest of his career since 2019. From 2020 through 2023, he passed it 572 times, 646, 567, and then 579 in 2023. So it would be an outlier season last year, right, based on the previous four. But I did prioritize the 28-game sample size of Josh Allen with Joe Brady as his play caller. And when we go to the 9 games in 2023, the passing attempts were 33 per game. In 2024, in the 19 games, the passing attempts were 29.7 per game. And so I factored in 30 passing attempts per game for Josh Allen in 2025. And there's a lot of variables that people brought up, whether it was the quality of the defense that the Bills had, right, or lack thereof, or, the Bills, Josh Allen was sitting a lot of fourth quarters and there was blowouts and they didn't necessarily have the reason to throw the ball late in the game, and maybe that'll be different this year. I would say this, though, over the 28-game sample size that I am referencing of Joe Brady as the play caller, I think you capture all of those variables. You have games like San Francisco and Dallas where the Bills ran the ball like crazy. You have games like the Rams and the Lions where the Bills threw the ball like crazy. You have big blowouts, where Josh Allen sits and doesn't run, or doesn't pass the ball much in the second half. Like, all of that's captured in the 28-game sample size. You reference the defense, and If the defense is better and gets the ball back to Josh Allen more frequently, could that lead to more throws? Yes, but I also think that probably leads to more blowouts, right? And the Bills controlling game scripts and the lack of necessity to throw the ball that often. I'll say this. If I'm looking for a reason for the Bills to throw the ball more in 2025, and I want to believe this is my foundation for projecting more passing attempts, I think it comes down to the wide receiver talent. And I think the Bills have better wide receiver talent this year than they did last year. I think Elijah Moore and Josh Palmer elevate this receiving core from Mac Hollins and Amari Cooper, who are the two players that left. And so not only are you looking at some younger players that are still ascending, whether that's Dalton Kincaid or Keon Coleman, or, get Khalil Shakir in his fourth season. There's a lot to be excited about there, but you've got better receiving talent, and in particular, receiving talent that can get open, right? Separators in Elijah Moore and Josh Palmer. And obviously this season will take on a life of its own, but they'll ride the hot hand. If the Bills establish this passing offense, that it's the best way that they move the ball, I'm sure they'll throw it more. If it's a situation where it's efficiency in the passing game, we really lean on the rushing attack, they'll probably run the ball and pass the ball about the same as last year. But even if the Bills were to get 3 more passing attempts per game, that's another 50 targets to play with that I didn't have when I did this last week. If they pass the ball 5 more times a game, now I have another 85 targets to distribute. So there's a lot of variables. I think they're all captured in the 28 game sample size that got me to 30 passing attempts per game. But what really inspires me about believing that the Bills could throw the ball more this year, it's really tied to the quality of pass catchers that they have this year, in addition to Josh Allen not necessarily having to establish as much chemistry as he did entering last season. So good question there, Derek. And I think hopefully that ties into a lot of the different questions that I've received on this, and conversations that I've had with people in our Discord and our subtext as well. Dan says, what is the likelihood that a practice squad player from last year will make the initial 53-man roster this year, following the footsteps of Jamarcus Ingram, Ryan Vandemark, Quentin Morris, etc.? Which player has the best chance to do so? It's a good question. Let me tell you the candidates. So these players were on the practice squad last year that are back this year. You got tight end Zach Davidson, offensive lineman Richard Garage, wide receiver Jalen Virgil, cornerback Daquan Hardy, quarterback Mike White, but there might be an asterisk there because he actually finished the season on the active roster. KJ Hamler at receiver, Tyrell Shavers at receiver, Frank Gore Jr. at running back, Mike Edwards, the offensive lineman, Corey Couch, a corner, and Zion Lowe, the defensive tackle. If we're tossing aside Mike White, who I think has a legitimate chance to be the QB2, I would look at the 2 receivers, Jalen Virgil and Tyrell Shavers, because if we assume the top 5 is Shakir, Coleman, Palmer, Moore, and Samuel, and I think most people do, and that the Bills will roster 5, which has been their number, none of those guys play special teams, right? There's not a whole lot of special teams value that any of those players give you outside of maybe the possibility that Elijah Moore is the punt returner, or maybe Khalil Shakir. I don't know if they put that on his plate full-time in addition to a 100-target role on offense. But you look at Jalen Virgil and Tyrell Shavers, like that would be their calling card as guys that are known, like Tyrell Shavers known for his special teams at San Diego State. Jalen Virgil is kind of the appeal with what he's done so far in the NFL. And both of those guys had opportunities last year where they were called off the practice squad to come in for certain games and play special teams. I could see that being their path, especially as I've said it. I think there's a chance that Curtis Samuel or Elijah Moore are not relevant for this offense. And well, that would be a pretty direct pathway to get one of those guys on the active roster. Then I would mention Zach Davidson. I don't think this will happen, but Zach Davidson is one injury away from Kincaid, Knox, or Jackson Hawes of being the tight end 3. And so I just think there's a very clear path for him, although I think Jackson Hawes will win that job, and the value that Hawes brings as a blocker trumps any receiving upside that you get from a Zach Davidson. So I would say Jalen Virgil, Tyrell Shavers, Zach Davidson are your most likely practice squad to the active roster players, following in the footsteps of, you mentioned Ingram, Vandemark, Quentin Morris. How about Alec Anderson? How about Cam Lewis, right? This is definitely a thing that has happened in Buffalo, and you can see the opportunity there for some guys this year. All right, coming up next, I love this question that was sent in from Bub about which season of the Josh Allen era would I consider the most successful. I'll attack that here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. And look, LinkedIn's new feature can actually help you write job descriptions so you can post your job and get it quickly in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip for you. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to get those qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's get into this question from Bub. Bub says, what year during the Josh Allen era would you consider the most successful? For me, it's unfortunately 13 seconds. That's Bub's answer. So I thought this through, and I immediately changed my mind 3 different times. And I think your contenders are last year, 2022, which would be the 13 seconds year. But where I land is 2020. I think 2020 was the most successful year of the Josh Allen era. And it starts with remembering what the team came out of in 2019, which was the 10-6 year. The Bills go to the playoffs. They lose in Houston. And that year, I think we learned that Josh Allen was going to be a good NFL starting quarterback. We just didn't know how good. And if you remember that playoff loss to Houston, one of the most chaotic football games you will ever watch, played by Josh Allen, right? Like all of the highs and lows and the Josh Allen experience was encapsulated in that game. Got really chaotic. And the Bills' decision of how they were going to attack the offseason and hand the keys over to Josh Allen offensively is paramount to where this team has gone and where it's going. Because they could have watched the wild stallion against Houston and thought to themselves, like, there's some really exciting highs here, but like we got to tame this stallion, and I'm not sure we can do it. And what did they do? They trade for Stephon Diggs, and they go from averaging 29 passing attempts per game in 2019 to 36 in 2020. They said, you know what? We saw how crazy you are in that playoff game. And what we'd like to do is get you a number 1 receiver and let you throw the ball even more. Huge. It's huge. And Josh Allen that year, second in MVP voting. The Bills win a couple of playoff games. They go to the AFC Championship game and lose. But to me, the decision to lean all the way into Allen, give him the number 1 receiver, say throw the ball like crazy and let's see what happens. The success that season brought, I think, got us to all of those Super Bowl contending teams that we've watched since then. So I will argue 2020 as the most successful era of the Josh Allen era, or the most successful season of the Josh Allen era. And I give the Bills a lot of credit for having the approach that they did of ride or die, baby. This is our guy, Josh Allen. Let's give him what he needs. Let's give him the keys and see what happens. And I think that was big in Josh Allen becoming the player he's become. Justin says this: can you take some time to compare Maxwell Hairston's skill set and fit into the Bills defense with that of Kaiir Elam to give us some level of comfort that Hairston is the man for the job? He sure looks the part between his blazing speed and ball skills from college, but man, that would be nasty opposite of Benford. So let's talk Kaiir Elam versus Maxwell Hairston. So from a size perspective, Kaiir Elam, 6'1.5", 191, 76.5-inch wingspan. Hairston is 5'11.25", so a little shorter, 183 pounds, so a little lighter, but he actually has a little better wingspan, 76 7/8 inch wingspan. So a little shorter, a little lighter, a little bit more length. Speed-wise, Kaiir Elam ran a 4.39 and Maxwell Hairston ran a 4.28. And let me tell you how different those numbers are. Obviously, that's a full tenth of a second, right? But when Kaiir Elam ran his 4.39, I think most people were surprised by that. You would watch Kaiir Elam and think to yourself, well, I think he's got some linear explosiveness, but in terms of overall movement skills, you didn't think he was like super sudden with change of direction or had really quick feet or fluid hips. Like you knew he was linearly explosive, but you didn't necessarily think he played to a 4.39. When you watch Maxwell Hairston's tape, and you don't say this very often, when you watch Maxwell Hairston's tape at Kentucky, you think, yeah, it's a 4.2, right? Like you'd never say that. You would never say that. But that's the type of mover that he is. And it's not just that he's linearly explosive, it's all around fluid with change of direction, foot speed, got fluid hips. He is explosive in all directions, where Kaiir Elam in a straight line, that's where you find really all of his explosiveness confined to that type of movement. So you have a guy that has play speed and time speed. With Kaiir Elam, you think to yourself, maybe this is a guy that learned how to run a 40, right? And maximize the technique. With Hairston, you knew it. You knew that guy was going to run. I don't think you'd ever really predict somebody to run in a 4.2s, but you would have thought, yeah, that's a low 4.3, and you're not surprised that it's a 4.28. With Elam, you were surprised that it was a 4.39. I would say both had some similar qualities coming out of college. Both of them, there wasn't a lot of high remarks for their run defense or tackling. I actually think Hairston's a better run defender and tackler coming out of college than Elam. And for both players, a lot of high marks for the ball skills, right? I think that was something you could see in both of the guys. Very, very similar. But where I think they're very different is the application on the field, where Kaiir Elam coming out of Florida, it was press man corner. But we don't know if he can play off man coverage. We don't know if he can play zone, right? That was the book. Yeah, this guy can play press coverage, and we like his ball skills. Not sure if he can play zone, not sure if he's going to work an off man because he's kind of tight, and we don't know if he can defend the run or tackle. With Maxwell Hairston, anybody that's watched the tape knows that this guy is exceptional in zone. Like, you have man coverage skill set in terms of athleticism, but when you watch the player at Kentucky, he was a zone player. I think they ran over 80% zone, and the way that he triggers and is instinctive and hunts the football and understands coverage spacing and layering routes, like, you have no concerns about that, where that was the concern with Kaiir Elam. And for Hairston, you might not say, well, he's a great man coverage corner, but he hasn't played as much, but you feel like he has the requisite traits to be really good in man coverage. So I think there's a lot different in these two players. And hopefully that answer helps those of you who have some concerns. And it's a couple weeks in a row where we've had some, sell me on Hairston, I'm nervous because Kaiir Elam. Well, hopefully that helped. Chris has a couple of questions for us. The first one is, if you could snap your fingers and guarantee the Bills lead the league in one of these two statistical categories, which one would you choose? Turnover margin or third down conversion rate? It's good. It's a good question. And I think the variable in this question that I am certainly being aware of is that I guarantee that the Bills lead the league, but then I also, on the other side of that, is I live with whatever they are otherwise, right? I'm just guaranteeing a certain category. The one that I'm going to guarantee is turnover margin. I've been taught, I believe it, the statistics plainly bear it out, that the most correlative metric outside of points for and points against to winning football games is turnover differential. So guarantee me that the Bills have the best turnover differential in the league, and that's going to mean that you took the ball away a ton and you took care of the ball. Third downs matter a ton. Like, it made it a compelling conversation, but I'm going to side with turnover margin. Chris's second question is, how would you feel if the Bills signed punter Mitch Wishnowsky, who was recently cut by the 49ers? How did he perform last season as a punter compared to the rest of the league? So that was a bit of a surprise move, where Mitch Wishnowsky has been an established punter for the 49ers. And then they signed Thomas Morstead, who's like 40 years old. Mitch Wisnowski, I think the big thing with him last year is he played, I think, the first 8 games of the season, and then he went on injured reserve with a back injury. I mean, he's 33 years old. So 33, missed the last 8 games of the season with a back injury, and they cut this guy for a 40-year-old punter. I think you got to read the tea leaves here and realize that maybe there's something wrong with this guy's back, right? But also, Mitch is, last year you asked how good was he? He was a league average punter in terms of EPA per punt. I think a lot of Mitch Wisnowski, but the team that was committed to him, drafted him, signed him to an extension, the history there is not, like, I don't like where this is headed. Back injury, then cut, and signing a 40-year-old punter. Is Mitch Wisnowski better than Brad Robbins or Jake Camarda? Yeah, probably. But you have the youth, right? Wisnowski's 33, and Camarda and Robbins they're young. Like, I don't think either one of us, right? They're maybe 24, 25, 26. And so, look, this is where I go back to with the punter. There's been opportunities to sign other punters. I'm hopeful that the Bills have seen what they have in Robbins and Camarda to this point and say, you know what? I think we can make it work with one of these guys. One of these guys could be our long-term answer. And it just feels like any punter that's invoked to this point, there's been questions, right? Wisnowski, 33, back injury. Morstead was brought up. It's like, man, he's very old. And do you want potentially the ceiling play? You know, we'll see how it goes. I'm nervous about punter. But the more that the Bills stay committed to Robbins and Camarda, the more hopeful I am that one of them can be the answer because they've seen them work a little bit at this point in time. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about if the Bills have to play this season without James Cook, what that would look like. Somebody has an interesting contract suggestion for James Cook, and then actually a question on the Patriots. We'll do that here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. All right, welcome back. We have a couple of James Cook questions. These are different angles, which I can appreciate. I think we've said a lot about James Cook, so anytime there's a creative angle, I always appreciate it. Bob says, let's say James Cook plays hardball. Can you comment on the Bills' options? Bob continues to say, I firmly believe the offensive line is the key to the run game, but prefer to keep Cook versus scorched earth. Are there any reasonable free agents? I think your best free agent options are J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, and Nyheim Hines. Dobbins had a good year with the Chargers last year, but we know there's been a long history of injuries there. Nick Chubb, I think at one point I would tell you that he's the best pure running back in the NFL, but the last 2 years have been injuries, even though he finished last season. Nyheim Hines is out there, but he was a nothing burger last year for Cleveland. So point being is there's not a lot of great options. I think I would be hopeful that J.K. Dobbins would be signed. But I think the reality is if the Bills somehow go this year and, you know, James Cook says, I'm not showing up without a deal, the Bills say no deal, they don't trade him, or they do trade him, whatever it is. I think this comes down to Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. And again, it's not, you look at this situation right now and you think James Cook takes 50%, Ray Davis takes 25%, Ty Johnson takes 25%. That looks differently without James Cook. And you would invoke Darrington Evans would then become part of this. And remember, Darrington Evans basically made the team last year. But then when they brought him off injured reserve, they didn't have a spot for him. And there's an explosive element with Darrington Evans. So Darrington Evans wouldn't come in and play 50% of the snaps. Darrington Evans would come in and restore to some level the explosive speed element that James Cook provided while you give a good amount of workload to Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. So I think that's what would happen. It would look different, but I think it would be Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, and Darrington Evans. That's what I think would be the plan. I think Raheem Blackshear's out there. I know a lot of people loved him in preseason. Maybe the Bills could sign that guy. Wonder what Christian Wade's up to. He's explosive, right? Charlie says, what if we extended James Cook for 2 years, $30 million? You give him the 15 he wants, but coupled with the 5 he'd earned this year, that'd be a real 3-year, $35 million deal, which hits your 12.5 number that you think is appropriate for percentage of cap. You can also bake in some incentives to add a little more to it. I'll be honest, I think it's a pretty reasonable idea. I don't hate it. I think the reason the Bills might not love this is because it would be basically just a 2-year extension. And because it's only 2 years, you don't get a lot of years to play with cap hits. So you're going to have pretty healthy cap hits the next 2 years for James Cook, unless you want to bake in a bunch of void years, which I don't think you want to. Maybe you would, but you wouldn't love it. For James Cook, he gets the 15, but he might want more long-term stability. I'm guessing right now James Cook is saying, I want 4 years, $60 million. And while he gets the APY, there's some guaranteed money he'd probably have to not get, and he'd only be on a 2-year deal. Maybe he'd like that. He can hit free agency again whenever, in 3 years, he'd be 27, 28, something like that. But I think the challenge for the Bills is that you just wouldn't have a lot of years to play with cap hits. And, especially next year, you're probably going to have at least a $10 million cap hit. So that's what it would come down to. But I think that's probably one of the more interesting ideas I've heard to this point. Maybe that's how everyone kind of gets a win. We'll see. Maybe just James Cook plays this year and go from there. I think that's what's really going to be helpful. This year is going to give us clarity on James Cook, not necessarily because we need to learn more about who he is as a player. I think we know who James Cook is as a player, but this year will present the opportunity for more Ray Davis, to see how this passing game evolves, to see if James Cook does prove to be better on passing downs in terms of the pass pro. If there's injuries and different guys gets more opportunities. If the Bills win the Super Bowl, let's say the Bills win the Super Bowl, and James Cook plays out the season, like, you're not really panicking after that. Look at what the Eagles won the Super Bowl. They transitioned away from a lot of players. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Mekhi Becton at right guard. Do you think they're sweating about that? No, they just won the freaking Super Bowl. So I think that's my most hopeful outcome, is just let this year happen and then deal with it. Hopefully we can get there and James will show up and we can get this thing going. Joseph says, do you think Josh McDaniels, that's the Patriots offensive coordinator, will adapt his offensive scheme to incorporate a quarterback with the athleticism of Drake May, or if you think he will limit May's abilities by forcing him into his old system? So that's an interesting question, and this is one of my fundamental issues with Will Levis last year with the Titans, is it was kind of a round peg square hole situation with the quarterback, Will Levis, who's not an on-schedule player. And you're talking about Brian Callahan and West Coast offense and, processing quick and route depth and timing and precision, and that's just not Will Levis. And I have some level of concern about Cam Ward stepping into that, because I think Cam Ward's another guy that's not necessarily an on-schedule player. I would say this was also true with the Bills in 2017 when Rick Dennison was the offensive coordinator and Tyrod Taylor was the quarterback, and that just didn't work. The Bills were not productive passing the ball, and they made the switch to Nathan Peterman, which obviously looks like a silly choice, especially amid a playoff run, but Nathan Peterman was a better fit to run Rick Dennison's offense than Tyrod Taylor. There's a lot more into it than just that, but skill set wise, that made a lot more sense. So point being is you do see offensive coordinators not willing to adapt what they do for the players that they have. There's great examples of it right there. In the case of Josh McDaniels, if I'm a Patriots fan, this is where I take comfort. When Josh McDaniels was the head coach of the Broncos, they drafted Tim Tebow in the first round. And Tim Tebow is not a quarterback that you're going to fit into any rhythm, timing, precision passing offense, right? And they had a lot of different run scheme stuff for him, and let him play a little bit more free. I think they have to. I'd be disappointed if I were a Patriots fan that they tried to restrict Drake May and try to make Drake May play like he's Tom Brady, right? I think that would be silly. So it'll take on a life of its own, but I think with a guy like Drake May or any of these quarterbacks that are dual threat, of course, there's always you're nervous about injuries and all that type of stuff, but that's also part of the DNA of the player. It's part of who they are. It's part of what makes them good. And you've got to be able to thread that needle. And so I again, if I were a Patriots fan, I'd be hopeful, but I think it's worth talking about. And I think first and foremost, they do want him to play on schedule, right? I think every quarterback, step one, run the offense, win from the pocket. Every quarterback has got to be able to do that. And then you sprinkle it in from there. I said this with Josh Allen so many different times. You've heard me talk about do the smart right thing with the football. If you were to take, let's say there's 40 drop back passes in an NFL game off for each team. For 30 of those plays, every quarterback should do the exact same thing, right? There's a read, there's a progression. You should do the same thing. It's those 10 plays. It's that smaller percentage of the plays where it's like, oh, that's where the special part of the quarterback comes out. Where, hey, maybe we didn't have the right call against the defense, but our quarterback can play above X's and O's and get us out of a bad play because of the physical upside that they have or the instincts or the playmaking ability that they have. Or, hey, we weren't anticipating this pressure look. This quarterback can do something special, right? And that's what I get concerned about a lot of these quarterbacks, like even like Caleb Williams with the Bears. Like he has that ability to do the special stuff, but it's the larger percentage of plays of just running the offense that you got to see him do. So there's a lot to get into with, hey, you need to do the normal thing that every quarterback should do for most plays, run the offense, make the right decision, place an accurate throw. It's what you do in that smaller percentage that really is the difference between, hey, you're a dude that we're going to win games because of, or, well, you can't help us. You can't do the special stuff. And now all of a sudden our bad plays are just always going to be bad because you can't elevate. So if I have Drake May as my quarterback, I want the special sprinkled in, right? I got to figure out how to thread that needle. And that's what's ahead of New England. And I think a lot of Drake May. I thought he was terrific as a rookie, and we'll see how it goes. And so as a Bills fan, I'm not actively rooting for his success, but I have my suspicions that Drake May is going to be a good one. All right, folks, that's it for today. We're going to have a lot of coverage the rest of the week centered around what we learned from OTAs, which are going to be open to the media. On Tuesday, we'll have media availability. We'll have practices, participation, all the stuff. So I'm excited to get into that the rest of the week with you. All right, folks, that's it for today. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.